If you could sign it. All right, ready to go? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the March 13th Select Board meeting. Remind everybody that the meeting is being broadcast and being recorded. The first item of business is the consent agenda, which includes town accountant's warrants, the minutes from January 23rd and March 6th, gift acceptance, Rebecca Sheehan, $1,000 to the Emerson Field flagpole gift account. We're grateful for that gift. Picnic in the Park, Inc., $1,000 to the Emerson Field Landscaping Improvement gift account. Thank you very much. One-day special license, True West, on April 29th from 6 to 9:30 p.m. at 274 Forest Ridge Road, wine and malt only.
Move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the town manager's report. Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Public Works Department indicates that they're prepared for the storm tomorrow. They have plenty of salt in the shed and the crews are all ready. They will probably work through the day tomorrow during the storm and then continue through the night, Tuesday night, to have the roads open for commuters and school for Wednesday. So that's their goal based on the current forecast for the storm. The governor has asked people to stay off the roads on Tuesday. If he closes state offices, which I think he may have, then it would be my intention to close town offices here in Concord. Acton has already announced they're closing their town offices. The planning board.
Yes,
I think,
they announced. Actually, the patch announced them before they announced. Scooped.
And the planning board has canceled its meeting for tomorrow night. It was originally going to announce that we snow and ice expenditures, that we still have a positive balance of about $82,000 as we began this week, but that will likely be this.
Sounds like wind is going to be a big problem.
Yeah. And the light plant is prepared to respond to any power outages. It'll be light snow, but with heavy wind, so there could be problems there. Paramount Pictures has approached us and would like to film a feature film partly in Concord called Daddy's Home 2 with Mark Wahlberg.
See Daddy's Home 1?
I didn't see it.
No.
And Mark Wahlberg and Will Ferrell. They'd like to begin filming in the
cameo.
They did in the past. They'd like to film on Walden Street. The theme is a Santa's Village winter scene. They'd like to film at the Scout House and at the Tricon Church. Not this week, this would be a good time. But the plan is to start the last couple of days of March and film through the 22nd of April and be done before town meeting. And they've coordinated with the police department and others that will be involved. So. If all works out, I would plan to approve the plan. They will provide some compensation to the town for use of the streets and some parking areas.
And then any expenses and all of that.
And then they cover any out-of-pocket costs for police officers, or they will remove some signs and they want to change the lighting on some of the street lights, and they'll pay for all the costs associated with that. And they're working with downtown businesses because they will relabel some of the stores downtown. They like the appearance, so business owners, I think, are pleased to have the opportunity to have their establishments in a feature film. Let me see. Concord Cleanup is a spring tradition, and it will be taking place from March 25th through April 2nd. People can get yellow bags from the Natural Resources Office and leave them, fill them with litter collected on the roadsides, and leave them on the side of the road, and the Public Works Department will pick up that trash. It's a tradition that's been very successful, engaging a lot of volunteers and cleaning up after the winter. The planning board visited the solar field at the W.R. Grace site at the behest of neighbors from North Branch Road, who were asking that some evergreen trees be planted near the solar installation because they can, when the vegetation is off, the leaves are off the trees in the winter, it's possible to see some of the solar panels from North Branch Road. So planning board requested, and as I understand it, Kearsarge, the developer of the solar installation, agreed to plant 20 evergreen trees to provide some screening. Good news from Sudbury on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. They've met the 25% design stage, and will be petitioning the Metropolitan Planning Organization to include the Sudbury segment, Section 2D it's called, in the Transportation Improvement Plan, 5-year Transportation Improvement Plan. So hopefully the trail doesn't end in Concord and goes through to Sudbury and then to Framingham. The Select Board in Acton has rescheduled its meeting planned for tomorrow night to discuss the Nagog Pond project to Thursday in the Town Hall in Acton. And then lastly, the annual town election is Tuesday, March 28th. The deadline for registering to vote for that election has passed, but the Tuesday is the day of the election.
And are you planning to attend the Select Board Acton Select Board?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Any questions for?
The incident that the train tracks that involved the arrest of a couple of juveniles, I noticed that the police report indicated that a couple of weeks earlier there was children building a snowman on the train tracks. Has there been any follow-up within this? I mean, it's down in the court, so I don't want to get involved in that at all. But in terms of sort of making it clear and understood that train tracks are dangerous, and do we have any liability, or is that the MBTA? And
It's generally the MBTA that's responsible for people trespassing onto the tracks and that sort of thing. But if the T has suggestions for how we can help keep things safe and keep people off the tracks, we're open to doing that. Chief Joe O'Connor worked for the T in law enforcement for many years, so he has connections with them. I'll ask him. I normally meet with him on Tuesdays. Probably won't meet tomorrow, but I'll ask him if they've got some ideas, if there's things that we can do to reduce.
it sounds like it was handled well in order to apprehend as quickly as they did, so it kind of doesn't spread at all. But that was obviously an alarming situation.
It was.
As a frequent commuter, a daily commuter, I have to tell you, there are often kids walking the railroad tracks behind Crosby's. There's a whole little area that's been set up. There are lawn chairs just off the tracks. And
there's, as I told you,
It's an opening
on
in the
another
fence.
occasion, we had a new fence put up, but there's a gap between the new fence and the fence that's around that building or on Sudbury Road, and they just use it as
Access onto the
I
tracks
don't
to
know
cross
why
the fence.
the MBTA stopped their fence. 1 foot.
kids are coming out of Cumbies.
Yeah, it's a shortcut.
It's-
Well, I know why the kids are doing it, I don't know why the MBTA stopped. I mean, there's a gap between their fence and the next.
And that's at that very location where the
Exactly.
the incendiary devices were.
Yeah.
So I'll ask the police chief to speak with him about that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Chris.
Mhm.
It's 7:10, and we have 7:05 public hearing, so we're late already. So I would like a motion to open the public hearing.
I move to open a public hearing for Brian Parkin as manager of record at Paparazzi, located at 768 Elm Street.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Come on up, tell us. Please, for the record, introduce yourselves to us. Tell us why you're here.
My name is Brian Parkin. I am the general manager of Paparazzi, and I'm asking to be the manager of record for the liquor license.
And my name is Ryan Blaney. I'm a restaurant manager over at Paparazzi as well, and I would be serving as the assistant manager of record at Paparazzi.
Terrific. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Or
So I was actually the assistant manager of record in this property 2 years ago with Gary Morrison, and I was moved to the Framingham property and promoted. I've been with our company for about 3.5 years now. We just want to continue to be a community-oriented restaurant and be a safe place for the community to go to. And yeah, that's
What about you?
So I've been with the company for 3 years now. I started shortly after Brian, previously at the Burlington location where I did serve as the manager of record for the Burlington location. Since transferred about 4 or 5 months ago over to the Concord location. We're intent to spend a good period of time and help out as well, but it's been good getting to know the community. So,
Where do folks live?
I live in Newton.
I live in East Kingston, New Hampshire. Yeah, that's the appropriate response.
Yeah. And how long is that a commute?
It's 55 miles door to door.
Wow.
Yes, I like the company.
Yeah, that's a long commute for
Yes.
the number of hours.
Yes. I have a very understanding wife.
And Chris, I would ask that you confirm that you've reviewed the application for
Yeah,
completeness.
the application's in order. The police have registered, no concerns about the two candidates.
Good. We require the manager of record work for at least 30 hours during the time alcohol is served. Will you be on site full-time?
So,
And the manager of the establishment,
Yes.
okay? And all employees that serve, sell, or store alcohol over the age of 18 and have been tips trained?
Correct.
And who's the alternative manager of record? He's
Right,
gonna be,
yeah.
all right, so we got everything on the board. All right, there are other questions from, Alice, no?
No, I was recalling from an earlier discussion with Paparazzi that it's used as a training facility for other managers, and is
So-
that still ongoing? And this is a,
Yes, this, we're fortunate that this property is large enough to accommodate the training of the managers. So there's still an influx of people that come in from time to time. I think we've had 2 in the past 4 months, so it hasn't been a lot. There hasn't been a whole lot of turnover. But as there is turnover, yes, it will be used as a training store as well. It will continue to be. So.
So does that make you, the two of you train, are you engaged in that training? Is that
Yes.
part of your?
Yes, so our executive chef in the building, who's been there for 12 years at this Paparazzi, and myself will be responsible for the training. So, and the other managers in the building as well. It's always the expectation, so.
Other questions? Any questions from citizens? All right, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
so moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Do we have any further deliberation on this matter? I would entertain a motion then.
I move to approve Brian Blaney as alternate manager of record at Paparazzi located at 768 in Elm Street.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, fellows. Welcome to town.
Thank you very much.
We'll be open for, check
We'll
out the
we'll
place
see
very
everyone.
soon.
Thank you very much.
Good night. Next item of business, Black Birch 1, conveyance of conservation land off Forestwood Road.
Hi, Delia Kay, Natural Resources Director for the town. And the last meeting that I was at, there was some electronics presentation, so I thought I would kind of step it up a little bit and just run you through a couple of quick slides here to give you a visual of this presentation. So this is a request for select board approval for the Black Birch conveyance of land off Forest Ridge Road. And this is for the Black Birch over 55 community that is being constructed right now. There are 25 units that are under construction, and as part of that town meeting approval and special permit for the alternative PRD, there was a requirement that the developer deed land to the town, 50% of the land, to conservation purposes. So just to give you a little bit of an overview, you guys look at this screen or this screen? Which one? I guess this one is a little easier for you. So this is not going to work on, I hope it doesn't work on the LED screen, but in any case, this is just an overview of properties that are in conservation land. So the bright green is the 2 parcels that are being conveyed by Black Birch, and they connect into some border road conservation land on both sides of Border Road. And then up in the upper right corner is Kennedy's Pond, and the old rifle range. So what is sort of nice about this conservation gift, this is zoomed in a little bit, is that this does provide a connection that did not previously exist. It is up against the development of the community, but you can access this from Forest Ridge Road and go through these parcels into existing town conservation land and connect into those parcels as part of the development. So this is 1.01 acres in 2 separate parcels. And there's also, we'll be presenting a conservation restriction on an additional 6.31 acres. And that's really within the development and adjacent to the development itself. This was nice because it's a separate, it's quite separate from the development and provides a nice connection and has trails through that the developer is maintaining. I do have a couple of other slides, but that's really if you had any specific questions about the parcels themselves.
Okay, so are there additional questions for?
Well, this looks like a really great addition.
I think that they're virtually all constructed, aren't they?
Almost all of them are constructed.
And many of them are sold, although
Yep.
relatively few number of them are. So.
Well, what's nice about this gift is that it connects to previously owned properties and with conservation land. So there's a good corridor for getting from one place to another, which is always a bonus to us.
Right? Seeing no other questions, then I would entertain a motion to, that's not a public hearing. So, I don't see anything.
Okay. I move to approve the gift of land and deed for the property from Black Birch Development Partners LLC to the town of Concord by and through its Natural Resources Commission in the form presented to the board at its March 13, 2017 meeting, and to authorize the Natural Resources Director to take all actions on behalf of the Natural Resources Commission that are reasonably necessary in the judgment of the Natural Resources Director to complete the acquisition by gift of the property, including without limitations, signing, closing forms, affidavits, documents, and settlement statements.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Nice. Nice thing.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is public-private partnership discussion. So background for folks listening, you'll recall the select board constructed a public-private partnership committee to look at these partnerships in town and to make recommendations to the select board about them and the process for which they're reviewed and looked at by the town. The committee did that. Spent a lot of time, a lot of work on it. I think probably to a lot of people, a reasonably more complex problem than they thought it was going to be. Nevertheless, the committee has submitted its report to us at a previous select board meeting and asked for the opportunity to provide comments to the discussion we had that night, which they did. And we had other comments from citizens and from the Library Corporation, as I recall. So this evening we want to try to discuss the matter and to take whatever actions we deem appropriate. I was suggesting that we kind of tackle this in the following way. The first, there are recommendations that the committee made, 5 specific recommendations, but I think we can kind of cluster them in a way that might be helpful. But the first is bless you.
Yeah, excuse me.
The first is the definition, they provided a working definition of a public-private partnership, and I think that's worthy of some discussion. When we finish with that, group of recommendations has to do with the notification to the town manager and the development of a memorandum of understanding between the affected parties. That kind of combines a couple of the recommendations that the committee made to bring forward. Then the third area we could discuss is the reviewing of public-private partnerships, where the committee has specific recommendations and a process for it. And then for the establishment, which the committee recommendation was recommendation number one, the establishment of a standing P3 committee. So I think that even though there's 5 recommendations, I think we can glom them all together. So I think first I'd like to know if we have any comments on or questions about the way the committee chose to define a public-private partnership. I don't think I need to read it, but.
I think one of the issues on that is they found when they went into trying to analyze the various P3s, that there were such a diverse group, both in size and also in terms of longevity of being in existence, and kind of this historical issue that involved. And there was a focus on making sure that it was something that the town itself was involved in. That was the public side of it. The private side generally is easier to define, but kind of exactly what the town role and everything got to be varied. And so I think that was why there was a good deal of time spent trying to analyze that.
I know when I was reading and thinking about it, and when we talked with the committee and when we discussed it ourselves, we think of things like a lease. And they have, in the statement they say a service contract, grant, or gift does not necessarily create a public-private partnership. I think that's probably true, but is a lease a public-private partnership? We have a lease with Emerson Umbrella. And is that a public-private partnership?
The lease itself might not be, but when there's funding for an expansion or CPA funds, that gets to be, now they have their own set of regulations, Community Preservation Act, in terms of how they monitor and follow up. And I think they're tightening that, in fact, which I think is one of the benefits from this study, is that there is kind of an overall sense that some of these things did need to be tightened up a little bit. But I think it will depend a little bit on the nature of the lease. An ongoing lease of 10 years might very well be some form of partnership if the town gets involved. At least there should be some type of an understanding of what the purpose is and making sure that that lease is tight enough so that it protects the town and it accomplishes what the goal of the lease is. It's not just a transaction, but it's something where the public may need some input in.
Staying with the umbrella example for a moment, the granting of the lease was a town meeting action. Mm-hmm. So I don't mean that means anything in particular with respect to this, but so the town meeting had to vote the lease. So I'm still trying to decide, is that then a public-private partnership? It spells out in the lease what you can and can't do, and what you are going to do, and what you aren't going to do.
It's probably, and I think that's one of the things that has to, if you will, get grappled with as we go on. But I think the question kind of gets to be, even before the lease is finalized, if there's something new, that whether citizen input. I mean, that was, I think, the focus is when does the citizen input get encouraged and get, there's a process that the citizens feel they can get in before there's voting at a town meeting up or down. That can sometimes, the up and down vote is not necessarily the best way to go, that there needs to be, while the agreement is being, if you will, negotiated or planned, that the citizens have some type of a knowledge of it and input.
So are you suggesting that this be somewhat of a public hearing process? I'm thinking that this is one example with the umbrella. I'm thinking about other leases that the town may execute, like the Barrett Farm. Is that a public-private partnership? And at what point, I mean, is that open, that lease agreement open to negotiation or comment from public? I'm just trying to grasp, the depth of this definition.
Well, it would strike me that if that lease was on the website and people was aware that there was going to be a lease, so that if anybody did want to, I mean, my guess is most of these leases where it's in fact not going to be something that you're going to get a lot of citizen input on, but that if it's where that the town is planning to execute a lease and the lease is on the website, and so people have 10 days or whatever it would be in order to be able to review it and see it, that would be sufficient. I don't think you need a public hearing as such, but I do think you want to have the ability of people to be aware of some type of agreement that the public is entering into, the town is acting on its behalf, where there's financial implications involved.
So that suggests the formation of a policy about anytime the town is about to execute a contract or a grant, that there be a public comment period for 10 days.
Yeah,
Materials are available on the web.
I would think so, yes.
So you're not suggesting that we need to convene the committee or a committee to review and engage the dialogue. This is a formal public comment period, basically?
I would think on most situations that would be sufficient.
What would be the threshold that would not be sufficient?
Well, I think the, if you will, the dollar value and to some extent the, if you will, the impact on the town. Something, and I think that one of the concerns, and it gets back to get your definition, but one of the concerns is that there was a feeling of frustration among people regarding Junction Village, whether there was in fact sufficient information and knowledge going through. Now, going back and reviewing some of the things, I think it was more than people realized, but it wasn't located necessarily in a place that the public kind of had a sense that they had the opportunity at an earlier period to have input. I think a lot of these issues are going to kind of be, because each partnership is different, that if whatever group or whatever process it is, I think it's going to have to get developed as we see material kind of coming before the select board. I mean, we may find that there is, only one or two a year that require much more than having a 10-day, put it up on the website and a 10-day period for public comment.
Well, the committee itself, I think, had some
They had $150,000
dollar and
yeah.
also a time
Yes.
criteria as a way to sort of sort.
And I think they spent a lot of time on that, but I mean, I don't think that is, if you will, the crux. That might have to get adjusted as time goes on.
Well, so I very much like Alice's idea, and that is that we commit to some, I don't want to figure out what the language is here, but we come up with some kind of policy statement that says anytime the town intends to do X, whatever X is, there has to be a public posting. And we could create a website portion up there that has some clever title on it. And
Public comment.
so I think that's that's good, and I think even if we didn't have this report from the committee, that's a good idea, right? So I think that's probably something we should attempt to do. However, and the however doesn't have anything to do with doing this, but some of these things don't originate with us. Right? And don't even originate, I'd ask Chris, when was the first time you had any formal action that was required of you with respect to the Junction Village project? I don't really, the answer is not important, but I suspect not near the beginning.
Right, correct.
Is the point. So I think it's okay, but if you, I think you take the Housing Corporation as a separate entity, they have the rights and responsibilities to do what they're supposed to do. So I think that while we could do it as a town anytime, or the school district, the regional school district, as another example, they've got a job to do, they've got responsibilities, they don't have to come to us to do anything. So I think we need to have we could have it be a public policy for the things that we initiate or are responsible for. We could also, I don't know what the right word is, but we could also encourage other entities within the town to adopt a similar kind of policy. I think I mentioned before, but we did that with the audit committee.
Yeah.
Remember, the audit committee was the town, and we went to the regional district and said, I think this is a good idea, why don't you guys hop on? They did, we've done it, working fine. So we could promulgate something that says that our hope is that, or encouragement is, I don't know what the right word is, but
Can you help me understand one piece of the definition? Can you tell me what the discussion was that has that a service contract might be relevant to a P3? I'm sort of thinking that town issues many contracts for services. What would be outside a normal contract for services that might be considered a P3? I just didn't understand, a contract is a legally binding document. Are we thinking in that term of contract, or is it a gift of service as opposed to a service contract? I'm not quite sure I understand where that is in the definition.
We do have a couple of the members here, whether they might have a better,
Recollection.
whatever.
come on up.
Thank you.
I would think something like if the town decided it was going to outsource something, if they decided they weren't going to do.
Is that a partnership in outsourcing?
Well, no, in the sense in which I think we would
Right.
think about it,
Right.
but yes, in the sense that it would have important implications for the town and ought to be done with some knowledge or with somebody's, with
With
citizens'
transparency.
ability to weigh in. So I don't think it's public-private partnership.
Whereas refuse collection,
Yeah,
street sweeping, extra snow, removal of vehicles as
maybe we
needed.
invite you to come up here. and
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Identify yourself for the
Sure.
record.
Jean Goldsberry, excuse me, 1832 Main Street, Concord. So we really specified in the definition that a service contract does not necessarily make something a P3. If the town contracts for snow removal or refuse removal or, whatever it might be, that's a simple service contract. That's not necessarily a public-private partnership. There might be times when the town contracts for something, but there's something more and larger about that.
But can
that-
you give us an
Yeah, that's
example
what that's
of a service contract that would be a
CCTV.
public-private partnership?
CCTV.
Okay.
private
Yeah, sure, that might be something considered as a public-private partnership, where it's not just, we just have this, service contract, you're gonna do X and we're gonna pay you Y, and that's it. But there's more, sort of content to it and more expectation of this whole thing was just to keep things clarified and to be an aid and a support to the select board to be able to give some input so that if an oversight committee, a P3 committee is formed, that group would then look into a potential P3, would take a look at ongoing P3s and be able to say, select board, here's what we see. In the end, it's your decision, what you want to do about a particular P3. I think it was our understanding from our initial charge that the town had some concerns about P3s, and it wasn't one particular one or another particular one, but several that felt like, they maybe were going off the track or had gone off the track or potentially might. So that was where the suggestions were born.
Still grappling with how I would differentiate between one that is and one that isn't. And I'm not really trying to find a right line. But if we're going to do anything around it, then we have to be able to sort of wheat from shaft and say this isn't and this is.
Sure. I think that some of that will happen over time. I agree, you've got to have a starting point, so it's not like every little thing that's happening is. So we came up with the $150,000, more than a year kind of threshold to sort of sort out small things that are can just go forward, that don't need a lot of oversight because they're not going to last very long and or they don't cost a whole lot of money. I suspect that if you do seat and empower a committee, that committee will start with that as a working definition, and they may over time come to you and say, you know what, we're refining this now and we see it like this. This study committee tried to pull together what we could see at this point, tried to sort of look out a bit, but that crystal ball's not always totally clear.
So, yeah, I get it. You mentioned in your remarks that there were some, whatever we were going to call them, that seemed like we were off the rails. What were they?
I'm really reluctant to call out one or another P3 because I think the committee felt very strongly that people involved in P3s are doing that for good reasons, that they want the P3, whatever the project is, to be successful, that there was not a sense that people were trying to hide things or not do things correctly, that people wanted to, but just for one reason or another, they sometimes didn't go as smoothly as they could have.
Well, I'm not looking to put anybody on a hot seat.
Yeah.
What I still am concerned about is the two that I know that questions were raised about, neither of them had anything to do with town stuff. That's my concern. Because I've seen a lot of them come here, and I can't think of ones that come through us that don't get early airing and stuff. So my concern is, that are we setting up a process to deal with things that don't really fall in this jurisdiction, but fall in some other jurisdiction over which we don't have any control?
Well, yeah, and I think that the study committee recognized that it's bigger than just the select board. And the hope was if the select board could empower something, whatever that might be, that then the study committee could go to, for example, the regional school committee and say, well, like you did with the audit committee, maybe, you would want to do this. We had some sort of preliminary discussions with some school board folks about whether that might be possible or not. So
I also think sometimes the P3, and I'll use the library as an example, feel that they made a really concerted effort to try to get input all around. And I thought their letter to us, they're basically saying, look, we tried to do everything we could, and this is a situation where we had to make a decision quickly, but after that, we got neighbors, we got, and yet there was a feeling among some of the citizens of the town that this was kind of a decision that went through without their knowledge and input. And I think oftentimes, I'm not saying either one is wrong. I think sometimes it's more of a perception. And if you have a process or a structured system where when something comes up, there is an availability, whether it's on the website or whether it's part, it has to go through a group, a committee of some type. People then know how to find out about it. There's so much that goes on in town that I think even concerned citizens often have a hard time being aware of everything that is going on.
Well, that's why we have such an elaborate committee structure, though.
Well, that's right.
And in fact, you've got to, or you're gonna go insane, you've got to sort of put some faith in your fellow citizens to kind of do their job, or you go crazy trying to keep track of what's going on. In a little bitty town like this, you know. We go back to the library corporation. The library corporation is not a public organization in that sense in which I'm talking about.
Right.
They have every right to do exactly what they did and not share that responsibility with anybody, not share that decision with anybody.
Right. And I think they did make an effort.
And I'm not suggesting they did anything but the best thing. But
Norm, I mean, I say,
it's another organization over which we don't have any control. And I don't see creating a structure does anything.
but the partnership aspect of it comes into play when the town is then called upon with a development to hire new staff, to pay for.
But sure, we can also say no. I mean, we don't have the responsibility to, just because they did X, for us to do Y.
But I think it's at that point when they want to, I mean, the idea, I think, is not a checks and balance as much as trying to get input to improve the situation so that everybody at the end feels that it was a, if you will, a joint decision in terms of how it evolved. And that's what my point is. I'm not trying to criticize in any way the library committee, nor am I criticizing the citizens who somehow feel that there was a process that they were left out of that they wanted to have some input in.
Yeah,
And I think what we're trying to accomplish is kind of merging the two.
But I don't want to create a process that doesn't address those issues.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I'm not.
I think there's a concern often that kind of another government structure, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, is one of the big lies. And that people don't, trust having a sort of another process. And the question is, can we come up with a process that actually will benefit everybody?
So
I think-
one more thing about it, and that is, so forget about the existing agreements that exist. I don't think really very good. So if we think about going forward and having some kind of relationships, I think not only the idea that you talked about, some about public comment period, but also one of the things that would be, we haven't gotten to the memorandum of understanding, but I'm going to go there anyway, would be something about open processes.
Yeah.
All right, so that when we sat down to craft a deal with the contract with the Emerson umbrella, whether it's a public-private partnership or not, it's a lease, but either in the lease or in a memorandum of understanding, there would be some responsibility to be forthcoming about decisions that they might make in the future. You know, I think you could, going forward, that'd be pretty easy I'm not sure it'd be easy, it could be done.
Sort of a statement of how we approach this.
Well, think of it, so you're the citizen on town, and we're gonna craft up some deal here to do something, whatever it is. We can write in the memorandum of understanding, or the lease, whatever it is that governs our relationship. Things like, you need, anytime you're gonna make a decision that's bigger than a bread box, or costs more than X on this property, you need to have a public hearing or a public comment period about your intentions.
So it's an assertion of Concord's process.
Yeah, so we could tell the I'm not suggesting we do, but we could write into the library contract before you decide to buy any additional property, you need to have some kind of public comment period. I'm not suggesting I'll do that, and I don't even think that's a good idea. But, so that you could talk about.
But it's more than an assertion, though. It's in that memorandum of understanding. So if they try to get funding from CPA or something, you have to follow that process. It's part of the deal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, anytime they try to, like the same with Emerson, Emerson, and I think they are getting some money to finish the windows.
Yes.
Right.
You know, they had to go before the CPC.
And it's a
I don't
public
think,
process.
I don't think anybody has a problem with that. I think the problem would be, we didn't hear about the plan until there was already like a lot of plans. I think that's
Leaving the public at the last instead of the start.
except it says in the lease, you know,
Right.
that they're gonna do these kind of things.
Yeah, if I could comment, I know one of the big concerns that the committee had was lack of transparency in many of these P3s that, and again, not by anybody's, willful act, just it's kind of how it happened, and that having something that's kind of charged with overseeing it, whether it's a committee, a process, whatever, that then would help to ensure that there's better transparency, that people do have that connection early on. Certainly, any private entity has their private business that they do, and the town can't force them to make all of their business public, nor should they. And the committee recognized that's doable, but it's when the two are then connected that you need that openness and transparency and to, yes, to post stuff and encourage comment, but also to really actively engage people.
So, Chris, can I ask, would there ever be a situation where there'd be a public-private a P3, in excess of $150,000 that you would not be aware of or be involved with, other than something that's just specific to the school?
And the 150,000 is of public funds?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't think
Or
so.
accepting money of $150,000 on a partnership. So what I'm trying to figure out is the role that you would play if this board were to adopt a series of principles of transparency and open government, and we rely on you to be able to enact those principles. When somebody comes to you, Chris, I got a great idea. You got that land over there, we want to plant a bee garden, and we'll pay for the bee garden. And it's going to cost $200,000, if you'll give us the land. So we would ask, that's a hypothetical, whatever, but, this is, we would expect that you would bring that to this
Right.
board for discussion, so there's a public process. At what point would you feel like we need to have a different dialogue than one that could be here? If we publicize and a conversation will happen about a potential partnership that's been proposed, I'm not being very articulate at the moment. It seems like you have
Is
your
that
fingers
enough?
on.
If we do it here, is that
Yeah.
enough for
And with
notification?
you as
Right.
the arbiter of all of that, because it comes to you as the first step in
Right.
somebody proposing a good project.
And typically, I would let you know, the board know about it, that somebody has proposed a certain use of town property and they want on town property and that sort of thing. And the board typically would, register a concern or not. And then later in the then I would, if the board indicated that that sounds okay, let's get more details, then I would negotiate the terms, the circumstances or whatever, and the board would have a look at the agreement or lease or what have you. So usually it starts with, I wouldn't go too far down that path without the board's sense that sounds good or that sounds like a disaster.
And that would always be in an open session.
Right.
We've had
Yep.
many such discussions here, whether it's a tree planting or the garden, the park over here.
Right.
So I'm just wondering at what point would a P3 committee be required? Or how would we use a P3 committee if, maybe that's a better question for you. Yeah, because if everything sort of starts with the town manager and it's presented to this board for discussion in an open session, how does that differ than the transparency that would be provided by a town chartered P3 committee?
Well,
What would you add to that?
yeah, I guess my answer to that would be this then would be a group whose sole responsibility is to make sure there's transparency, to go out and really engage the public. No disrespect to this committee, but you're having a meeting tonight. You've got a number of significant things on the agenda, and I see a couple members from my committee and a couple people who have a particular thing, but it's not like you've got a whole lot of the public. Maybe they're watching on TV.
Probably.
It's the hottest
We're
show
very
on.
high. We're huge.
Yeah.
So are you describing that this committee would be really a largely public outreach? I mean, in other words,
Yeah,
that's the
that-
missing piece?
Sure, and if it's something large, that they would hold public forums and really work to engage the public, to contact other groups that might have an interest in it, to come to a public forum and share their concerns.
And wouldn't that be the role of government through its public affairs office to do the outreach through many channels of communication for the town?
Yeah, I'm imagining the town information office, I'm imagining departments that we have established and filled theoretically to, not solely for this purpose, but
Yeah.
this would be one of the purposes.
So again, sort of going back to our charge, which was kind of things aren't working as well as they could. What could we do to help this work better? This was our suggestion on what we felt could be done to help it work better.
And I think I mentioned it during your last discussion, in my experience, the two instances where the public was most frustrated about a partnership moving forward, perhaps without their consent or ability to participate, were involved the playing fields at the high school. And my recommendation would not have been to get a third group, a public-private partnership transparency committee in there, but the Recreation Commission. I think that ideally, if we had asked them to host the discussion of the playing fields, that would have been the right venue for the public to object to stadiums or PA systems or lack of bathrooms or whatever issues. The public was frustrated because they couldn't come to this board. They couldn't really go to the school committee because the school committee wasn't intimately involved in it. So there was nowhere for them to go, and abutters and others that had concerns didn't have a place to have those issues discussed. So I think one of your existing standing committees in the Recreation Committee would have been the correct venue. The meetings would have been posted, the minutes would have been taken. They have an interest in playing fields, so they would have helped guide the discussion on whether we needed, three artificial turf fields or only one or what have you.
What's the jurisdiction of the recreation?
I think they would have been commissioned by the select board to evaluate this and come up with a plan that balanced neighborhood concerns with youth sports issues, school issues, all of that.
We have
So-
no jurisdiction over that.
The town paid half of the cost, made a substantial investment in the turf, the Doug White Fields. It was $2 million was what you had in the mix.
And I'm not trying to put it in, and we didn't do that because,
It didn't occur, I was intimately involved in that, and it was a grassroots effort where multiple youth sports folks said, we don't have enough fields, we've studied fields forever, and ultimately a group said the high school is where we should put the playing fields. The school committee was comfortable with that, but abutters had some concerns about the dramatic change in the campus and the abutting properties. So to me, it may depend on the situation, but that was a case where I felt that was a ball that was dropped. We should have learned from that experience, that citizens were frustrated by that. They really didn't have anywhere to go. I think if we had asked the Recreation Commission to host that and try to resolve differences, that some of them might have been kicked up to you for a decision, but we were investing, I think it was $2 million in those upper turf fields. And a substantial investment from the town, as well as the regional school committee committing a substantial amount of land. And so that's where I think we could have learned to provide the community a venue where their concerns could be heard.
So where, I'm puzzling over that, there's a limit of the the P3 examples that are swirling around in people's heads about, as points where there could have been greater transparency. Where do a P3 committee that is a select board P3 committee then seems to me that is limited to one piece of the scope of what we're really talking about. So, are we looking at a review of, and then a recommendation as to your point, Chris? I reviewed these P3s that are in action. Rec department, you need to get engaged in this. This is under your, so it's sort of a steering mechanism versus another cog in the wheel, which some might feel would slow things down. And that might be very good, or it might, it might end up being a negative. I can't speak to that.
Right.
But that seems somewhere in the middle.
I think maybe the P3 could be more watchdog group that makes sure we're following the process, so that if a group comes to the town manager and there's people who are frustrated and can't find that venue, you guys are watching that process unfold, and if there's no action to provide that venue, you're there to kind of remind us, and we're a captive audience every other Monday, right? So we would hear about it, and usually
there was a discussion of the term transparency. Transparency kind of means you're looking into it. I think there was a feeling that it also needed to have an opportunity to have input into it, as well as, before you have reasonable input, you're going to be able to see what's going on. But just seeing what's going on was not the final goal. It was also to provide an opportunity for citizens to come and have communication about it.
So I do think that I agree with that, but I also think that it's inherently governmental that we provide that to the citizens. And we can be advised along the way that we're not doing a good enough job, but I think that transparency, that dialogue would be inherently governmental, that we should be directing that in all of our actions, not just P3s. And that's a high standard, a high bar. We need to figure out how to do a better job at that. That's where we're failing. Maybe your suggestion of using the rec committee or the rec folks would be a good one to start on this. So I don't want to dismiss the thought that this committee worked really hard and sees a strong role for a P3 committee. Advocacy on transparency and open government, I don't see that being a chartered committee, but I do see that being government always needs careful watchdogs into the process and can bring forward when they see something not quite working to meet the public interest. But I'm trying to find the right role for a P3 committee. It's something, I could be the only one that feels that this is inherently a governmental function to provide the citizenry with access to government. And that it should
I
be
feel,
about
I
here.
feel exactly the same way. I think just like your remark and suggestion about the comment period, shorthand for a bigger issue. Another set of policies that we could adopt is to specifically require us, the government, to positively articulate methods where how the public will become knowledgeable about this and how the public will be engaged. I mean, it's part of our, Chris brings us something. We talk about it all the time. But then before we could take any action, policy A says we must have a 10-day comment period. Policy B says we must affirmatively articulate how we intend to make sure the public is informed and engaged. And so as a government, we can take on these policies and require ourselves to act in a particular way. And then we can be held accountable. If we're not doing it, somebody should whack us. Right? I like that better because I think that's our job.
I'm not sure, I mean, my sense was that the committee didn't feel that having a committee structure, they were taking that away from us, but they were going to be kind of supplementing.
I get that they were working, Gina said it, so other committee, sort of on behalf of the board. The analogy that, I don't know whether you've used it or not, but I will, is the audit committee. So they constructed this audit committee. I'm on it, so, but.
You constructed it.
Well, it was a recommendation of the
Town government.
Town Government Study Committee. But we put it together and then it comes to the board and says, okay, we took a deep dive into the financials here and here's what we think about it. That's the.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think in that respect, it's roughly analogous to that. And I think to your point, the other part of it was also just keeping an eye on, ongoing of projects. And if there's an agreement that by, April 15th, this task will be done, that gets sort of checked up on. Did it get done? Or is it, oh, well, that got put off until June and now it's going to cost $50,000 more. Just someone to sort of stay on top of the P3s. If it's a newer one that's getting its work going, and then on an annual basis, just to check in with the ongoing ones. What's happening? Anything new? Are things still moving ahead as planned?
Well, that, to me, that's the same problem in the sense that once we've decided we're going to do something, whatever it happens to be, it gets passed off to the professionals in the town to discharge these responsibilities. And it's our job to, working with the town manager, or we're supposed to do this, pave the road, whatever we're supposed to do. I think that's part of our job as government service people here. So, the thing about the audit committee that is different here is that understanding that stuff requires some particular expertise, or at least it's useful to be able to know that kind of stuff. Public-private partnerships are by any definition of them are all over the map, right? The construction project, the grass project, so that the analogy doesn't quite work as well for something that requires, specific financial knowledge to be able to wade through the weeds and things like that.
I think that, to follow up on that, or to string that analogy further, the value that the audit committee offers, and I would imagine the reason that multiple jurisdictions the regional school committee, the school committee, you know, we've talked about Junction Village, any one of these might really audit committee would be because of these points of expertise. So the question is, would these entities engage a P3 committee? What is the service being brought that, because we can only, you know, we can only recommend an activity that would extend to the P3s that would be within the town's jurisdiction.
Correct.
And it doesn't capture, it doesn't have the larger value that you were just describing.
Well, I know Bob is here, wants to make a comment, but the way we deal with that lack of expertise on stuff is we turn to town departments. So if we need something about natural resources, we'd ask Chris to talk to Delia and come in here and tell us what the heck is going on, or Marcia, member, or the police chief, and whoever. So that's our expertise set. Bob, you
Anyways.
tell us who you are.
Yes, sir. Robert Braun, Mildred Circle. You haven't heard that for a while. But anyways, I wrote up some comments, and some of them are actually pertinent to what's been discussed already.
That's good.
And
So
to set the record straight, I'm a member of the school committees and a former member of the Public-Private Partnership Study Committee, but I am speaking as an individual and resident. I want to first of all thank the Select Board and the Town Manager for their involvement and interest in concerning P3s in Concord. I think this is a field, a group of partnerships that needs attention, and the town overall has to find a way to go forward with keeping an eye on these partnerships and helping in terms of their creation and so forth. As I'm saying here, there are many different types of P3s, and most should be subject to different levels of oversight. Establishing guidelines concerning the creation and oversight is not a simple matter. The process needs to be flexible and subject to significant cooperation between the Select Board, the Town Manager, and, in my opinion, a group of residents interested to work on this effort. So it seems to me the best approach would be to create a task force or committee of anywhere from 3 to 5 members at this time, who would be carefully selected by the Select Board and the Town Manager. They would all need to work effectively and cooperatively to assure what we heard at our forums over and over: transparency, full disclosure, and openness. It will also be of great importance to put in place an effective way to communicate more broadly and timely with residents on any issues that come forward. Also, an informative webpage on our town website would be of great benefit as a source concerning proposed, current, and past P3s. And of course, this is all should be developed over a period of time. Nothing's gonna, go from 1 month to the next and be fully established. As members of the former P3 study committee, we researched various P3s in detail. My input was mostly concerning the Doug White athletic fields at the high school, CC at Play, and the youth sports programs in Concord. And it would make a lot of sense for this new committee to take a look at the youth sports programs and other users of our athletic fields in order to improve transparency, full disclosure, and oversight. And this is one of the areas that, Mike, you had sort of asked about, is there a particular partnership right now that could use some oversight and some, some maybe yearly reports and so forth. And the youth programs, as far as I know, there isn't a heck of a lot of oversight that the town is engaged in. But correct me if I'm wrong. So in closing, there's plenty of work for this committee at this time. The most important aspect is to find the most appropriate residents who are interested and have certain qualifications and have enough time to commit and will work productively with the Select Board and the Town Manager. And I've come back 2 or 3 times that these three entities have to work together. And to be honest with you, I think if you were to select 4 people, let's say, in the next month, let that group of people decide and work on and come to terms with what the way forward should be. And you know, with input and close discussions and cooperation with the select board and the town manager.
So less formal and more of a,
Like, what would you envision the charge of the committee to be? That we would charge the committee to do, I need a little help. How would you, you know, would you like to review the town youth programs?
Well, that would be the oversight function, and that would be something that could be worked on immediately. The other thing that I mentioned that's very important is develop a communication strategy. And, you know, we have certain, you know, the town has an email list, and so there's certain pieces in place, but I think we need to be more innovative in terms of reaching those that later on in a year or two come forward and have a stake in the discussion that they somehow missed or weren't informed about, you know, when it was starting to take place at the earliest stages. And so that would be another function of the committee is communication and overseeing the website, a web page on our website. So if anyone has any questions about P3, they could go directly to that web page and see a lot of information. They're
I think
both
it's good to have a
past
webpage. I
and
think that's a
present.
smart recommendation. That having a place where it's its own entity, where you can review any and all of the active P3s and even some that are now finished. And my trouble is still around figuring out the role of the public affairs personnel or department in the town, and an independent committee doing its own outreach around any of the public-private partnerships. I haven't quite come to terms with what that relationship is, because I think we will always hear from folks who say, I didn't know. How come you didn't tell me? And so we have to figure out how do people get information, and how do we provide it so people can come and get it? It's not just me to you, it's you have to come looking for information. And so one thing is the news and notices have really shown a huge uptick in the number of people. I think we're over 1,000
Yes.
people who receive it every day, every week. But we have to drive whatever that channel is for people to get information, short of, you know, using the reverse 911 to let people know the public meeting, where nobody can say they didn't get it. So that's a comment, I hear that all the time, that I just didn't know about something, and it's not that it wasn't available to be known, but somebody didn't know where to go to find it. And I don't know how to fix that other than making available all the different ways that you can learn about town events.
You're not tweeting enough, Alice.
There you go.
That's right, you're not tweeting enough.
I am. Have you followed me lately?
I am,
Okay,
but
thank
not about P3 though.
you. Sure, I haven't been tweeting P3 yet.
He's got more followers than anybody on the planet.
It's true.
Okay. So the second item on my little hit parade here was the notification to the town manager and the development of an MOU. I think that whether it's a committee or it's not a committee, that's a good idea.
Yes.
And in fact, I have already put it in play a little bit, because as you mentioned, this Junction Village project is going on. And so Chris and I are working on developing an MOU that would be between the Housing Development Corporation, the Grantham Group, and the town, which just is going to try to articulate stuff that isn't elsewhere. It's not, there's a contract between the Housing Corporation and Grantham and stuff like that. But so I think I think that's a good thing, and I think it would be. You know, the town manager brings all of these things that are in our jurisdiction to our attention, And I think that would just be the formal, one part of the formal set of things. You wouldn't want to do it the first time you came because we wouldn't exactly know what we're talking about yet. But before we took any specific action, this would have to be developed and approved. I think that's a very helpful process.
I think the committee felt that even on smaller projects, there should be some type of an agreement. I mean, there was a concern that memorandum of understanding sounded like it was going to be a very involved, difficult process, and but anything like even the signs that were going over the river for scenic would have at least a brief agreement, so that again could be put on the webpage. And
Some will be complicated, some won't be.
Exactly.
Even if that project is under $150,000?
No, that was very,
Okay.
that was.
So the benchmark is still
enough.
150,000.
But there should be at least, there's an agreement, who's gonna put it up, who's responsible, what happens
Yeah,
if,
okay.
it would just be an agreement that was very simple, but made sure that issues of how, what was gonna happen in the future were thought through and addressed.
So a standard form that would be.
Yeah, it would be very simple, I think, on most
But
situations.
the committee made a lot of good suggestions about the kind of things that you want to incorporate in there. So I think that's,
I think a lot of what the committee did is already, if you will, spilling over. As I said, the Community Preservation Committee is tightening their monitoring when they give a grant to make sure, which is really just kind of what is
I agree.
expected, even though those might not be considered partnerships, but they're still, this process makes sense.
well, so that takes me to item number 3,
Yes.
which was a regular schedule for reviewing existing public-private partnerships and related to the creation of a standing committee, but a point all by itself. I think that's something I would want to adopt. Last year, I guess it was last year, we had the umbrella in. It might have come in this year too. I think they could be twice.
Yeah.
The Library Corporation was here. So on the big ones, I think that happens. I think the ones that are more difficult, and I'm going to turn to Chris in a minute for some advice. I'll speak for myself, I was a little surprised at your, and this is my own ignorance, a little surprised at your response to our last meeting, the committee drafted. I wasn't surprised by it. I was surprised by the attachment of the list that you made. I thought, wow, I didn't know that. There's a lot of them.
Sure.
And I think, Chris, I don't know whether we go to a committee or not, we ought to have an established policy for how these things are and when these things are reviewed. And they could be based on the size, I don't know, we could find some criteria for it, but there ought to be a regular review process of these things.
Like a time period and then a renewal every.
Yeah, I mean, some of them are really teeny and, but still, it would seem to me a simple, I don't mean simple in that it wouldn't take time, but a simple, straightforward report that could be developed perhaps by the assistant town manager that looked at these smaller ones and prepared a statement on a periodic basis, whether it's every year, I don't know, it's suggestions that you guys would make. But so that we would, again, articulate a policy for reviewing public-private partnerships. They shall be reviewed, forget for the moment whether it's a committee or whatever, but they shall be reviewed, and to follow is the detail. If it's bigger than a red box, it's every 6 months.
I mean, we should be holding those P3s accountable. A lot of them are corporations, nonprofit status. They
And the
are required
reality
to
is,
file
the big
annual
ones we
reports.
probably do, because there's stuff going on
Right.
Yeah.
mostly with them, but it's the medium and small size ones that, we don't. They stay the same from year to year, nothing has really changed. But we have so again, to me, that's a policy the board could articulate, whether it hands the responsibility for doing that to a committee or to a town department, I can finesse for the minute. But I think that's a really good idea. That we I think it just is good government to do that with no sense that there's anything untoward at all. That's just
Yeah.
good policy. And so then we come to the last item that was on my way of running ourselves through, which is the, and I'll phrase it as whether we would take on this responsibility as a board or whether we would assign this responsibility to a standing committee. I think, because I think the process, the MOU, the reviews, fine, it's easy to adopt, right? So I think that remains the unresolved question. We can talk about it, the path forward that I'm going to suggest, so we can do it like that, is that we, over the next few whatevers, weeks, probably going to get town meeting kind of started, that the board would authorize me to work with Tom, because I think Tom's probably, of all of us, has been, was the liaison to committee, so he knows what's going on. Sit down and try to articulate these policies. And then we come back and we talk about it in public, obviously, but articulate these policies that we talk about. My thinking going forward, and this is up for whatever discussion we want to have, is that I'd like to see the board do this. And then if it turns out that it's too onerous for us, it gets in the way of what we're doing, or we don't feel like we have enough time to devote to it, or we don't do it, then I think we've got evidence to suggest that even though it is a governmental activity, that in fact we need help discharging this responsibility, and we should turn to the citizens like we do for everything else in town here to help us get the job done. But I'd like to, since I do believe it's our job, I would like to start and see if we could get this stuff in place and get at it and find out how onerous this is. And I'm sure the committee, would be able to be present when we're member of the committee anyway, not the committee, because we probably put you out of business here, but would be able to be in attendance here to, help us through when we're doing it. So that's the kind of idea that I've had about this. So I'd like to give it a shot, because I think, especially for the big ones, that's our job. And for the smaller ones, maybe we get some help from some town department and come back and do it. But the big ones, I think, and we tried to do it. We identified the umbrella, we identified the library corporation, we even though it's not a public-private partnership, the museum. And asked them to please come in here and talk to us about what was going on and what their plans were, because people were going to want to know. And we authorized the town manager to redo the condition, some of the conditions in the lease, for somebody to take action where it was appropriate. So what do you think?
So I think that's a good approach. What I still don't want to dismiss the committee's work and their interest in maintaining it, an entity that helps us. But until I think after you put together the basic policy structure for what the government should be doing, what Chris and the department should be doing, may give us a better opportunity to be able to figure out what a charge to a committee would do for us on an ongoing basis. At first I was thinking it was a committee that would meet on an ad hoc basis as something would come up, and I heard a lot of pushback that ad hoc wasn't the right approach, and that resonated. But other than that, what is the long-standing charge? And I think maybe your document would help us define what we would be able to rely on from a group of citizens that may not be the group that we have now, And we have to recognize that these terms turn over and are very different interests that present to the board every time that, we seat a committee member.
I think those-
But without the structure of knowing what is the box that we're building and under which a committee can assist the town. I'm comfortable with seeing it right now.
So,
Right.
so go ahead with the
You know,
development
of
of
the
the policies
policy.
and the process.
Yeah.
And then, in light of that, be better informed about whether or not a
A committee
committee
is,
How is
makes
that
sense.
executed?
Mhm.
that's
And,
a
and,
big,
allow that group to provide feedback on
Yeah.
our plan
Oh,
and
yeah.
processes and.
yeah, oh, yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
If you haven't already signed up for news and notices, you should do that.
Oh, yeah.
How's that sound to you, Jane?
That goes for anybody listening on television tonight.
Yes.
Way forward?
I think it makes sense, yeah. Well,
Okay, any other comments that you folks have?
Just one question, the timeline, you mentioned a little bit as to when you would think you can get this
The
accomplished.
truth?
The truth,
Town meeting is
Yeah.
and nothing but.
We're, I mean, Tom and I could work on it, but I think scheduling, I don't think it's as much the time to get it done, the draft of this, as it is the time to schedule it, to have it here. We don't have really much time before town meeting to have a public meeting about, we could probably get a draft done. We might even circulate the draft and get comments. I don't have any problem with doing that, posting it
Yep.
Yeah.
in comments, but it'll be after town meeting that we would,
Fine.
have the actual meeting where we would wrestle this in.
So sometime in May.
probably reasonable.
Yeah, and do it before the summer, so we've got folks around. So May, I don't want to
Yeah.
commit, but May, yeah.
Maybe me.
Maybe,
And I would suggest that in the interim that we take to heart the recommendations for open government and transparency, and through Chris and Public Affairs Group and all the town departments, make that sort of a recognition that whatever the activities are, rather than just being the public meetings that are held, if something rises up, it ought to be widely publicized through our own channels for now.
I agree.
I think we've taken, I'm all in support of it, but I think it needs to be said that we've taken over the course of the last 2 years a lot of steps forward with respect to transparency. And so, and more than
reiterate again, our website's one of the
I think-
awards.
right, yeah,
being
it
the
is.
Best website.
Does that seem reasonable to you folks?
Okay.
And I think, thinking about how to develop a webpage would be a good thing.
Yes, yeah, that could start now.
Right,
Yeah.
that goes a long way.
Thank you. Ingrid, do you have any comments or?
I'm gonna digest this a little bit, thank you.
Okay, we do have a seasoned news media here who can help us advise on
Yeah.
channels.
Again, great season to those of you that came this evening and change you and your committee.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Appreciate it. And we'll get this draft done as quickly as we can and get it circulated to your committee and obviously to the board.
So do we continue?
And then plan on getting back together with perhaps a revised version of it sometime in May.
Okay.
And make progress. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you very much.
Thank you, appreciate you taking the time to help us think through this.
Thanks for coming tonight. All right. As soon as I get to it. All right, I don't even know what's going on.
Special town meeting, special town meeting.
Okay, yes, we have received certification from the clerk, the acting clerk, that the petitioner has submitted a request for a special town, submitted a petition article, Concord is a welcoming community, that was signed and certified by 244 citizens of the town, and therefore we are obligated to have a town meeting within a certain period of time, but the obvious period of time is inside of our regular town meeting. I met with the moderator today to discuss the possibility that this would happen, and the timing for this would be on April the 25th, the second day of our scheduled town meeting at 7:30. So I'm going to in a moment ask for a motion to call a special town meeting April 25th at 7:30 PM and to officially open the warrant for the town meeting, which will be open for 10 calendar days. Is that correct?
Yes. I'd just suggest a location as well.
And the location of the special town meeting will be at the regional high school. And the town moderator tells me we're going to meet in the gymnasium.
So, I'm ready to make a motion, if you're ready.
Please.
So move to call a special town meeting on Tuesday, April 25th, 2017, within the 2017 annual town meeting, and to declare the warrant for the 2017 special town meeting open as of today, Monday, March 13th, 2017, and to close the warrant at 4 p.m. on Thursday, March 23rd, 2017. All articles must be turned into the town manager's office on or before that date and time. The special town meeting will commence at 7:30 p.m. at the Concord Carlisle Regional High School as part of the annual town meeting.
And if we close our offices tomorrow, if we have snowed it, do we extend that?
It's 10,
Okay,
10 calendar days.
10 calendar.
There's a town bylaw that requires the board to leave the warrant open for at least 10 days, except in cases of an emergency. So it'll be 10
For
calendar
a
days.
second.
Second.
For discussion?
So did the petitioner will be submitting their article within the warrant?
I think
It's already been
it
decided.
has been submitted.
Yes.
And because we had over 200 signatures, we're required, since it's a citizen, not a committee, to honor that petition and call a special town meeting.
Correct.
I would say before we vote that opening the warrant, though, it is perfectly possible that we would get other warrant articles. Our next meeting, as you know, is March 27th, which is after the warrant closes. So on March 27th, we will have a draft warrant, which we will have to approve. This is a citizen petition, so we don't have any choice but to put this on the permanent warrant. But there could be other warrants that would come forward from committees in town. Those we can decide whether or not we will put them on a permanent warrant, other than planning board warrant articles, which we are required to.
Correct.
Does a mailing then have to go out to citizens or what?
This will be posted, and then there will, the special warrant article will be distributed.
The warrant will be mailed to individual
Like,
homes.
just like
Yeah.
regular one.
Right.
Any other
Hearing on the article?
We'll have to set a hearing date.
Yep.
Um,
on this and any others.
And this on any others, and
Can we hold just one hearing and have all committees that may want to be engaged in this? Or is it only a select
We'll have
board
to see
hearing?
when the warrant closes.
It depends what articles are on there, but you have done that in the past, had a single evening with multiple town committees.
Okay.
I'm going to suggest, Chris, we don't have to determine when the public hearing is tonight, do we?
Or what's the time frame in which it needs to be
Are
held?
these the proposed
But I-
dates that
no,
I'm looking
I
at
would
here?
propose that we do it, in fact, I would propose that we do it on April 10th. We have a select board meeting on the 3rd. The 17th is Patriots Day, I think. And then the following Monday is the beginning of town meeting, so
So it's Monday, April 10th.
Monday, April 10th. And we should have the town clerk notify the petitioner.
Although I think he may be notified.
But-
And so he is notified.
So, you are notified, so April 10th.
It's a special town meeting, public hearing.
Public hearing, right?
I will not be available that day.
And-
Do we anticipate that there's any cost to this?
Well, the warrant printing and mailing.
Oh,
No, you mean to the
if it's
implementation.
enacted, is there really, will there be a cost, or is this just a kind of a declaration of intent?
In reading the petition, I did not see any particular cost.
I-
I mean, we were
I agree.
supposed to supposed to let all of our reps know,
Yeah, that's
But-
minimal, right, or not?
but no.
So, and the location of the public hearing
The town.
would be in the town, townhouse.
Here.
In the hearing room?
Yes.
Any other discussion?
Okay.
Are we ready to vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, none? Okay, thank you very much. Now, the next order of business is we need to begin to take positions on warrant articles. And as you know, I took the liberty of writing out a set of warrant articles that we could pick up and talk about tonight, the 27th, and on April 3rd. Andrew has also put a list of warrant articles on
I shared it to you, I have a copy here. if you
Okay.
want to, but also-
so that you'd be able to keep official record. And does everybody have a copy of the warrant? So we can go through this. I think Andrew brought other copies.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
I appreciate the conversation.
We'll be back, by the way.
All right,
I move affirmative action on Article 4, ratify personnel board classification action.
so a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. I move affirmative action on Article 5, classification and compensation plan for regular status positions.
Second.
All those in favor?
I move affirmative action on Article 6, personnel bylaws amendments.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Hold on, Article 7.
And we have discussed and looked at the town budget, I think, so I thought maybe we'd be able to approve that this evening, so.
And the number's still good.
Number is still the same number.
I move affirmative action on Article 7, the town budget in the amount of $40,943,520.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Article number 8.
I move affirmative action on Article 8, municipal building renovations in the amount of $350,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
I move affirmative action for Article 9 for public safety communications equipment in the amount of $225,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
I move affirmative action on Article 10, fire engine number 8 replacement in the amount of $575,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
I move affirmative action on Article 11, ambulance number 1 replacement in the amount of $260,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
Moving on to Article 21. I move affirmative action for Article 21 to establish a revolving fund, rental income from Marshall and Barrett's Mill Farms. What is the value, is it?
No.
No.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
I move affirmative action in Article 22, PEG access and cable related fund in the amount of
560.
what was that, $560,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
I I move affirmative action on Article 23 to authorize acquisition of 55 Church Street in the amount of, use the warrant?
Yes.
$1,200,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
I move affirmative action for Article 24, funding for telecommunication services in the amount of $1 million.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
I move affirmative action in Article 25, funding for technology improvements in the amount of $1,500,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
I move affirmative action on Article 26, smart grid improvements for the sum of $3 million.
Second.
All those in favor?
And Article 20, I move affirmative action on Article 27, comprehensive municipal facility needs study in the amount of $250,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I would suggest that we can go back and pick up Article 12, that's the bylaw regarding leasing by land. The select board and the town manager, we've discussed that rather any number of times, so we can, if you're agreeable.
I thought I heard that read.
Don't think
I move affirmative action on Article 12, a bylaw regarding leasing of town land by select board and town manager.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, Steve. Let me ask you to take a minute and please look at the rest of the articles that I listed for March 27th and April 3rd. And if you believe that there are other articles that I might have moved to the 13th that we could do tonight, I would be happy to. The ones that would strike me would be the enterprise funds, Articles 54 through 58.
We haven't had the enterprise fund hearing, which is March 20.
I'm sorry. I guess I was thinking.
31 to 33. Those are grants and easements.
The grants and easements, fine, we've discussed
Okay,
those.
we have discussed them.
All right, so somebody needs to,
There we go. I'm happy to do that. I move affirmative action on Article 31, Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, grant of easements to MBTA.
Second.
all those in favor?
I move affirmative action on Article 32, accept easements for Brookside Square development.
Second.
All those in favor?
Article 33, grant of easement to I move affirmative action for Article 33, grant of easement to W.R. Grace.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Right. Thank you.
So, what did we do?
$44?
Okay, December?
34 is not going to be
That's not
moved.
44?
I thought.
The Regional Housing Services revolving?
Grants and easement over. Oh, I'm sorry. I heard 34, sorry.
I move affirmative action for Article 44, Regional Housing Services Revolving Fund Expenditures in the amount of $200,000.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
35.
I move affirmative action on Article 45, Road Repair Revolving Fund Expenditures in the amount of $120,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. 46.
Yes.
I move affirmative action on Article 46, Cemetery Roads and Infrastructure Improvements in the amount of $150,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
You can do 47 too.
Yeah, Article 47, I move affirmative action on Article 47, 2017 Roads and Parking Lots Program in the amount of $1,415,000.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
And what about light plants? I didn't spell light correctly, it's ling plants.
I move
Is
affirmative.
that going to be discussed at the enterprise? Or is that enterprise frontiering?
How do you feel about 48, which is the senior needs tested property tax exemption? I think we've been on record supporting this,
always, yeah.
so I don't have any objection
I
to
think
it.
we've discussed it multiple times.
And this is the second step of the process.
It is,
Right.
and
Yes.
after this step, then we'll be having an election,
Election,
Yeah.
yeah.
which we'll have to schedule.
Okay, so I move affirmative action on Article 48, senior means tested property tax exemption.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Energy goals?
No, I don't think so. The reason for that is I met with, one of the items will be liaison meetings. So, I met with the light plant last Wednesday. And at the light plant were representatives from the Energy Futures Task Force, from CSEC, and others out front, and other interested parties. There was a discussion of the warrant article with some suggested language that I think would get everybody on the same page. So with help from a member of CSEC, I drafted a revised article with a change in the language of the Part B of the amendment and circulated it. So I haven't heard back yet from everybody, but I want to wait until we've heard back from everybody. I let the town moderator know I had done that and gave her a copy of the revised warrant article so that she could rule that it was still within the bounds. She hadn't ruled, but she hasn't. So I'd like to wait till we get that.
We haven't heard from the light plant regarding that.
At the public hearing, we heard from the light plant.
The light plant board.
And the light plant board has taken this up on numerous occasions.
And that was part of the discussion with the light plant board at the meeting last week, and without the specifics, it was adding some language to the warrant article, part B of the warrant article, which indicated that a consequence of adopting the policy that all the contracts for the light plant would be renewable by 2030, that it may lead to increases in rates. And I think the light plant board was concerned that the town be fully knowledgeable if they were going to vote for this, that the impact was articulated. So that's the nature of the change of the article.
And to simplify the text of what a
Simplify the language a little bit, 'cause it's a little complicated.
A little, well, it's extremely complicated when you get into the topic of recs and offsets. Are we able to take a position on 42 and 43?
They have,
Alternative PRD for that?
we heard Article 43 at our hearing,
Yeah.
but I think it's coming up at
It
the,
was heard at the planning board.
as far as the planning board, yeah, so we could take a position on
Right.
those if you're so inclined.
I think we have discussed this numerous times in this board. I think this board is ready.
Did we wait for them to, I couldn't make that meet, that
They
was.
came
night
to the
that
select board
training
and they
was,
presented at the planning board both.
No, but did the planning board make a determination?
Have they taken a vote?
Yeah, have they voted on it?
I
I
don't
don't know.
think they
We
have.
have,
Right.
and this board has in the past taken a position on this too.
These were the articles at special town.
Right,
meeting.
we've already done this once.
Planning
We
board,
don't usually wait.
and the planning board, I think, was planning to discuss both their motions that
Tomorrow
they'll be
night.
making on their articles and this matter, but they've canceled their
Yes.
meeting for tomorrow night. So,
How dare they?
I mean, if you feel more comfortable with it.
No, just,
But I think
I
this is
don't know if
something
that's
that,
the
practice.
sequence.
well, the truth of the matter is, this is something that I think I didn't handle very well for a special town.
Right.
We didn't know which the other.
No, I, like you said, we've talked about this.
So I think, if we have a point of view about this, I'd like it to be clear so that the planning board doesn't have to run down the hall and figure out.
So they all have our view. So,
I would like that, actually.
I move affirmative action on Article 42 by petition of the alternative PRD at Forest Ridge.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And I also move affirmative action on Article 43 by petition, release of residential restriction Lot 4A and Parcel A at Forest Ridge.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Well, we made headway.
We do.
And I put the school budgets at the end, not because of a concern so much, but that I do know, as you know, one of the school budgets is now conforming to the Finance Committee guidelines, the other one is not.
Which one is?
I think it's the regional school budget isn't conforming,
It's not
No.
conforming.
is conforming.
Is conforming.
Public schools is not conforming. And there's also the special supplemental, and they are still working on that. So I thought best if we could hold off as long as possible on that. The same would be true for Article 30, Junction Village. I'm still working on a couple of loose ends in this memorandum of understanding, so I put that to April 3rd, so we would have as much time as possible to try to get some of these matters resolved. So that's why the schools
I also think it gives us more time for both proposers, I mean, for the schools to have public discussion per our earlier conversation, and for CHGC and Brandon to have public discussions.
Yes. I think if we wanted to do additional articles, I think we were supportive of the landfill remediation last time it came up. I think the school committee has done a very good job of a better process this year of engaging the public. So I would have no trouble with that. And despite the fact that it's probably incomprehensible what Article 18 says on my little sheet here, that's the Minuteman
Vocational
Vocational
technical.
Yeah.
High School.
High
Yeah.
school.
I don't think anything's gonna change for that.
I move affirmative action on Article 17, Concord Carlisle Regional School District landfill flexible cap remediation in the amount of $1,200,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. And I move affirmative action on Article 18, the Minuteman Regional Technical High School District budget in the amount of $599,313.
Second.
And we could do one other if I could ask a member of the audience.
Do I?
Oh, sorry, all those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, well, no. If I could ask Ms. Miller, has the Finance Committee taken position on the free cash article yet? Article 19?
Article 19?
It's free cash for the support of property taxes.
Right.
Not-
Yeah.
You have it.
Was it an affirmative action?
It's not on the list.
Then I think we could
Okay.
do Article 19.
I move affirmative action on Article 19, free cash use in the sum of $1 million.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I think that's
It's pretty good.
enough.
Yeah.
Great.
Everything is mentioned.
We haven't had public hearings on it.
It's good that you call that 19, maybe we can figure out how we use it.
Yeah.
See these back up.
All right, so next order of business, so we'll take up the remaining articles on March 27th, and after, that'll be after the last public hearing, and then again on April 3rd. Since we're kind of on calendar here, let me tell you that I am expecting an additional, when we open the warrant, I'm expecting an additional warrant article. And I would just as soon not say yet, but it will probably be on our agenda as an agenda item on the 27th, if in fact they submit it.
Okay.
And on April the 3rd, on
Is it a
our,
citizen petition?
no, it'll be a committee petition,
Committee request.
a request.
Okay.
And then on April 3rd, I invited the moderator to come visit with us to talk about the consent calendar for the annual town meeting and to go over any last minute kind of things. And she's agreed that she was going to come. She's coming in from out of town, so it's going to be the last business item we have that day. So, all right, public comments, Linda. Henry? All right, committee liaison reports. Tom?
The Concord Historic Districts Committee had hearing on basically reviewing a number of matters, sort of standard. Bruce Friedman Rail Trail, the meeting was canceled. There is a pre-construction meeting scheduled for March 24th, and so the anticipated construction is to begin in the spring, which is good news. Committee on Disability discussed closed captioning of the town meeting and discussion, fairly lengthy discussion of the change of their status to a commission. And I think that's what maybe the other town meeting. The Board of Assessors, they reviewed numerous applications. They're a busy group and put in a lot of time. It's an interesting process, but unless you're involved, probably not the most fascinating in the world.
Honestly, it's all.
It's interesting, yeah.
I thought it was pretty interesting, actually.
And that was basically the group.
Good, thank you. Jane?
Most of my committees, we actually, we saw them in public hearings last week, so I don't think I have anything to add there. I will say that the comprehensive long-range plan committee met again last Friday. Again, progress onward, still awaiting our consultant. I think we'll gather the pieces and move us forward.
I had the pleasure of seeing the Public Ceremonies Committee this evening before my this meeting, which I was a little late for. My apologies. We discussed the possibility of that committee helping out with the Christmas tree lighting in this town center. I know the rec department and Assistant Town Manager Kate Hodges with the visitor center was thinking they would definitely work on that event as well, and Ryan from the rec department was at the meeting as well, and I think they kind of agreed that maybe rec department and Ms. Hodges could kind of basically organize the entire events that evening and let the PCCC manage the parade. So that's their expertise. They could get the line, everyone lined up, bring the trailer and the podium and kind of take care of that event. So at least they're there helping, providing support. So we'll see if Kate's okay with that.
Great, and an expertise in that committee to help out.
Yeah, thanks for.
Yeah, no, my pleasure on that. I also had the pleasure of attending the HATS meeting about a week ago, where MITRE and Lincoln Labs came and presented. Lincoln Labs, quite a bit of activity over there, an expansion on their campus. Not really on the existing property, but building a new facility. There's buildings there that were only meant to last about 20 years. And it's been quite a while, and considering the science and research they're doing, they're long overdue. Quite an impressive organizations both. And actually, I thought I was being not notified, but the Youth Advisory Board will be meeting later this month. I haven't heard from them in a while. They haven't been getting together, but that's it for me.
Have they assigned somebody in charge of the weather for Patriots Day?
Yeah, really. And Parks Superintendent B.J. Dunn came to the meeting as well and introduced himself, so it was a pleasure to meet him as well, and we kind of had to talk him through what Miriam's Corner is all about.
Make sure he shows up to the parade.
That's right.
Yes, exactly.
Right, well,
So I attended a site walk with the Minuteman Road Tech group, the school building committee. Traipsed through the woods, got the first deer tick of the season when it was
goodness.
20, less than 10 degrees out. It was very cold. I was surprised there were any ticks out. There was quite a bit of pushback from Lincoln during the site visit. The members of the planning board as well as the nearest neighbors attended the site visit. Major concerns were around the height and location of the flywall for the theater program, the theater arts and tech program. This is a very tall part of the structure, and it is closest to where the neighbors are. There's some concerns raised about legal jurisdiction of property rights and where the school's property is and where the private residences are. So there's a lot of back and forth on making sure that it's well documented on which properties are owned by Minuteman and where the lines are for each of the individual residences. But there was considerable pushback on the project from the residents particularly, and some pretty hard questions from the planning board. I attended the Concord Public Works Committee. It's always a great committee to go to. So I heard about the roads and parking, the parking lot improvement programs that we just voted on tonight. Some of the conversations that came up were concerns about the parking meters malfunctioning, whether they should or should not be installed. It may come back to this board at some point to reconsider the use of the parking meters. And it turns out that these parking meters run on battery to pick up Wi-Fi, and they're oftentimes roaming, so they die frequently. So they're disabled from being able to put money into the parking. So that was an interesting conversation because it was not what we had anticipated in this investment. The other thing, there will be 2 articles on the warrant that we will be discussing at another evening, both having to do with the Tree Preservation Committee and the new bylaw. Just to let you know that the Public Works Department has engaged a consulting firm to do a complete tree inventory for the town, and it's really impressive. They will go around tree by tree, mark, photograph, designate, locate on GIS all public shade trees and all other public trees that fall under the town's jurisdiction. And there will be, it has been some coordination with the planning office and with the Natural Resources Commission, the Natural Resources Department about their work, so it could be integrated with the tree preservation and the new town bylaw about who owns what trees and what locations.
What is that? What is that number buffer distance from the road?
It varies. Most of our right-of-ways are 40 feet wide, but in the new, more modern streets are 50, so it varies.
Total width. So it's
Total width, yeah, and the pavement can be located anywhere.
Anywhere in there, right.
This is an inventory of trees on only public property.
These are trees on public property, so this would include the ones that are in the public right-of-way, streetscapes.
So something like the trustees of reservations or the other private entities.
It's not a private land, these are only the town-owned properties. I forgot the number, I don't have my notes about how many trees this means, but it's
quite a lot.
considerable in the many tens of thousands of trees will be cataloged.
Right.
And I think locations will be identified where trees are missing, and it would be the ideal place to plant a new tree.
And there'll also be an identification of the integrity of the tree. If it's been damaged by storm or wind or age, and which ones maybe needed to be taken down in short term and long term, and what the tree replacement shall be for it.
Are we cataloging that from a climate change perspective as well? Because wouldn't that be,
They're cataloging, they're seeing damage from other inventories they've done around the country, significant changes to tree structure because of impacts of climate change.
Well, I was actually thinking the other side of it, which is if we're adding trees, doesn't that improve our footprint? In other words, are we also being proactive to count what we're doing going forward?
So these are several different aspects, and this is where I asked for the coordination between the tree inventory folks and the two preservation and the bylaw to work together, because there's a 3-to-1 replacement option in the bylaw that was discussed at our public hearing, at least the planning board's public hearing.
Right.
And so they're places that will have maximum benefit. The last I think might cover is the Energy Futures Task Force. I've been also in these numerous conversations with members of the committee and attending committee meetings. They've been meeting weekly to get ready for town meeting. The document is up on the web for anyone who is interested in taking a look at it. There's still some iterative changes that are being made, but it's a really good document. It's solid in its information right now. So anyone who's interested in seeing the document is up there on the web.
I think the Energy Futures Task Force is scheduled to come see us on the 27th, is that correct? Okay, well, I mentioned the light plant one that Alice just did. I also attended a brief NRC meeting Monday morning for the transfer of some rights. That was kind of interesting. I also was able to do sort of went out on Meals on Wheels. This is National Meals on Wheels Month.
Oh.
So they invited me to come, as they did last year too, so it was very interesting. And I was also invited to Concord Academy to talk to a group of students about municipal government. So that was kind of fun, and I did that. I wanted to let everybody know that I will be meeting with the CCTV board. We were going to meet tomorrow, but that isn't happening. So we're meeting on the 16th, it looks like.
With the CCTV board?
Yes, right. And that was, remember, we had this discussion, and I thought it, hear from the director, but also hear, make sure we understood what the board was doing, and I could report back on that.
I wanted to add a few non-formal committee activities that I engaged in last week. There was a Mothers Out Front meeting discussing Article 51, gas leaks, really sort of previewing their goals for this area. And I think, staying in contact with what they're doing is going to be important. They're very enthusiastic about the work of the Energy Futures Task Force, and I think they will be a partner in public outreach on that. I also attended a conservation coffee, which a number of things were brought up. It's always fascinating because I learn more about Concord every time I go to that.
It's a great meeting.
It is. And there was a further conversation about Article 28, and it's a continuing conversation at many of those the boards. And I was also invited to a site visit, to the Marlboro Grantham facility, which I believe is a 50-50, I think, or maybe it's a 60 or 70-30. It's not the 100% that we're engaged in. But I was invited to go to see a resident. This was the aunt of somebody in the community. So to look at it sort of from the resident's perspective, and it was very useful. I met a number of staff people. It was, there was everything from the understandable grumbles of the daily lives, but there was also a lot of really positive engagement. And afterwards, one of the nursing staff reached out to me and made a list of suggestions. I had said, we are considering becoming the next site, and we're looking at Concord's, what this does. What are the ways that you, this person as a staff member, have observed over I think she'd been there in a number of guises, so I think her tenure there had been 6 years. So she has some real depth there. And she sent me an email and made a number of suggestions about things we might want to, very small nuances, but things that she thought would make the lives of the residents really much more positive, as well as the employees. So, she listed private employee bathrooms on each floor, so that the employees and sometimes the residents don't all compete for the same use. Emergency call panel located in the general area on each floor. Obviously, you can imagine why that would be. And I think many of these things are probably, this was their first facility. So who knows where they are in terms of these kinds of.
Was there any discussion about air conditioning?
Well, actually, it was brought up a number of times, and that was not highlighted by this individual. It was highlighted. It's been highlighted at meetings that we've been at. Now, the room I was in had an air conditioner. Every room I was in had an air conditioner, and they were purchased. The unit had been purchased by the resident separately, but at a very nominal. Well, it was not a huge price point, and the Marlboro facility covers the cost of it. So you buy the unit. If your use pattern increases your electrical use, nobody gets charged for that. No. And then they talk about, how to make the rooms, especially some of the small rooms, more wheelchair friendly. There's a lot of interest in creating an outside patio area and gardening area, which I know has already been brought up in a number of the meetings we've had. And one of the differences in locations between the proposed site here and the Marlboro one, one is very urban and surrounded by a lot of pavement. We have, we have land there. And then they talked about what other facilities have, swimming pools, gyms, et cetera, and just that there are often complaints about staying busy there. And I certainly, and then the final piece was transportation to outside facilities. So, how do you go to anything from the doctor to town?
Right. Sounds like that was a useful visit.
Oh, it's wonderful to see it through the eyes of those who are experiencing it, because that's in the end, those are the people that matter.
Thank you. Miscellaneous correspondence. One that I want to bring your attention to, I think I forwarded it to you, but I got an email. I guess that's as miscellaneous as you get. Correspondence from Wayne Miller, our MBTA advisor representative, indicating that the advisory group of the MBTA is proposing to eliminate weekend service.
That was also broadcast on the patch today. I mean, that's been put
I
out.
want to know why we don't know about it, or why. I hadn't heard. It's not your problem. I don't mean it like that.
For a period of a year, so is that
Right.
a cost savings measure? I'd like to know how much are they saving?
What do we do about it? I wrote back to the guy, the person who had written to, and asked him, I said, how come we don't know about this? What could we do?
We lost weekend service while the tracks were being
That's
constructed.
when they were doing construction.
Yeah.
This
But,
had no indication it's related to a construction project, it was a cost saving measure.
I wrote the guy back.
No, but it's not even an
I
email.
received one and it's in the clip for the correspondence I can forward to you. It's from, I'm not even sure who it's from the MBTA. but-
Well, I
John
forwarded,
Regan, Paul
I
Regan.
forwarded the note, and copied you on the notes that I forwarded to the select board, and asked you to put it in the clip.
Okay. I think
Paul
we-
Regan disagrees with this change too, the representative to the board, but
Also, maybe you'll reach out to.
This was released by the MBTA today.
I'm so baffled they change in schedule for the winter snow schedule, because there is no train. The schedule is at 6:30 in the morning and 9. The only two trains to get to Boston.
It's active tomorrow.
I did hear
I know.
the governor
You can be on
announce
that side.
severe
Yeah, on the first
weather
one.
schedule.
The other part
Go
of
ahead.
this change is suspending for 1 year premium trips, such as the T's paratransport.
That what?
the T's paratransport services for people with disabilities.
And what's happening?
That they're considering cutting that too.
Okay, well, I'll follow up with one more, it's not miscellaneous correspondence, but one thing I should have mentioned before. Please review the warrant articles with the following notion in your mind. We are going to want to make comments about some of the warrant articles. I know I'm be presenting along with somebody from the Energy Futures Task Force, that warrant article, and I'm going to be presenting Article 30 on Compton Village. But we have other articles, and I want to be able to assign us the responsibility for any remarks that we're going to make. And I'll get that done on the 3rd. But if you could go through the articles and let me know what you think, then we can talk about it in the meeting. All right, reasonable?